When my mother-in-law learns about my pregnancy before marriage on the day of the wedding, hostilities flare out. My mother-in-law rises in front of everyone during the reception, slams me across the face, and yells, "You beggar! You cannot fit in my family." The visitors are startled by this public humiliation, but what really hurts me most is that my husband does not defend me. He stays quiet and won't protect me, therefore leaving me completely alone at that point. Furthermore, apathetic and devoid of assistance is my father-in-law. Nobody knows, though, what transpires the next day. One storm is building. Grace here is my name. I would love to tell you my story. This narrative is one of ups and downs, heartbreak and hope, and finally the path to discover my strength. Living in an orphanage, I was surrounded with a reminder of what I lacked as well as a haven. Though they were friendly, the caregivers were unable to cover the vacuum left by my absent parents. Early on, I realized life would be a fight, but I also discovered how to endure. Dreaming of becoming an accountant and one day making my own way in the world, I kept my head down and concentrated on my studies. I had worked hard and at last secured a solid position as an accountant in Chicago by the time I was in my mid-20s. When I met David Brooks, I considered myself en route to fulfill my aspirations. From a rich family, he was delightful and unlike anyone I had ever known. Our relationship was quick and intense. I felt as though I had at last found my position in the world. Then I was thrown off my feet. Once I found I was pregnant, everything changed. The news set me into a flurry of feelings: fear, delight, doubt. I recall the day I showed David. I could hardly find the words as we were seated in my little flat. As I continued, "David, I need to talk to you about something important." My heart surged. "I carry a pregnancy." His response was not what I had expected. David started pacing the room while his face grew pale. How could this turn out? "Not even sure how to be a father," he said, his voice tinged with anxiety. "David, we can work through this together," I said, attempting to be cool despite the anxiety building in. "We can chart a future." Deep down, though, I felt the weight of the planet resting on my shoulders. At last David cooled off and pledged to be by my side, even discussing marriage. That was before his mother, Caroline, started to play, though. Early in her 60 years, Caroline Brooks was a formidable businesswoman. She managed all aspects of her family's life, including David's. All hell erupted when she learned of my pregnancy. She was enraged, and as she challenged David about me, I could sense contempt in her eyes. "Are you really considering this girl? She is essentially a beggar. You cannot wed her," Caroline yelled, sounding utterly contemptuous. David objected, but Caroline made it plain she would not let me into their family. Her criticism felt like it was crushing me, but David assured me he would marry me nonetheless in an attempt to keep me from her fury. At last the wedding day arrived. I had pictured it quite differently, a day full of love and delight. Rather, though, it seemed as though I were entering a battleground. Though the ceremony went without incident, the true drama took place at the reception. Caroline got up as we were celebrating with friends and relatives, her voice slicing across the joy and music like a dagger. She said, "Grace," pointing a finger at me. "You begging, I reject you in my family." She slapped me across the face before I even could register what was happening. Stunned, I remained there as gasps erupted around us. The laughter stopped. Visitors watched. I felt all the eyes on me, evaluating, critiquing. But David's quiet was the worst of everything. He not stood up for me. He simply stood there, still like a monument. At that, I felt something spark within me instead of collapsing as I had expected. I wouldn't let her triumph. I wasn't going to let Caroline take it away from me. I had spent too long battling for my spot in this world. I moved into the Brooks' great estate following the wedding, but I soon knew the fairy story was finished. The realization choked me. David was far off, preoccupied with his mother's expectations and fatherhood's demands. Caroline started to act cruelly relentlessly. She minimized me at every chance and even doubted my child's legitimacy. Her voice shrill and piercing. "Maybe you've been lying about this baby," she would say. "David ought to be better than this. You're lucky he even married you." Every day I felt more alone and unloved. David's quiet started to weigh heavily on my heart, and I started to doubt whether I had made a mistake. Was I sufficient to do this by myself? Watching David withdraw even further into his own world hurt my heart. He started drinking more, and I felt our connection change. Once so intense, the love seemed to be a far-off memory. Often I found myself wondering how I had arrived here, lost in a life meant to be a dream. The turning point arrived when I delivered Ethan, my baby. I recall holding him for the first time and experiencing its tsunami of love. My motive to fight was him. Still, the loneliness felt intolerable even with all my efforts toward strength. Mark and his sister Megan then entered my life. Mark was an early 40-year man with an accident-related limp, but his heart was large. In those trying days, he and Megan, a lovely nurse's assistant, turned into my lifeline. They reminded me that I wasn't traveling this road alone and gave me hope as well as assistance. Mark came over one day as I was trying to feed Ethan and remarked, "Grace, you're doing a fantastic job. You are stronger than you could possibly know." Tears in my eyes, I raised a head toward him. I just find it difficult to do without David's encouragement. I sense lost. Megan said, "You're not lost," gently resting a consoling hand on my shoulder. "You already have us. For you hear us." That was the realization that in spite of the betrayals I had gone through, I could create my own family full of love and support. I had no idea that this would mark the start of a fresh chapter in my life, one that would challenge my fortitude and alter what I believed about love and family. Still, difficulties lay ahead. Caroline's hold on David tightened, and soon my new family would be fighting uphill against her schemes. I simply prayed I could have the will to keep steady and guard my boy. The Brooks mansion was not at all what I had envisioned. Every day seemed like walking on eggshells, and I soon found David was not the companion I required. Spending more time away from home, he found comfort in Chicago's bars and clubs instead of the cohesiveness of our new family. I heard him frequently arriving late at night, the scent of alcohol hanging to him like a horrible memory. One evening following a demanding day of looking after Ethan, I heard David fall into the house. The repetitive sound of the spoon clinking against the bowl seemed like my only solace when I was feeding our infant. David arrived glazed over into the room, and I tried to smile and reach out to him. "David, what was your day like?" He looked at me hardly at all. "Fine," he murmured, slinking softly against the wall. I let my heart drop. I was unable to stop the man I had fallen in love with from leaving. Days stretched into weeks, and our conflict mounted. Caroline carried on her emotional warfare campaign, looking for fresh means of denigrating me and undercutting my motherhood. With a smirk and eyes glistening with hate, "Ethan deserves better than a mother who can barely keep a job," she would add. Though it was draining, I tried to rise above her taunting. I felt as though I was always engaged in a fight without a clear finish. One day I heard Caroline chatting to David in the living room as I was trying to quiet a cranky Ethan. "He is only a baby, Caroline." David's voice was tense and frustrated as he said he understood nothing. "Oh, he will understand," Caroline said with a frigid tone. "He will see his mother as only a burden. You'll regret it later if you don't cut her off right now." Heart pounding, I froze at the entrance. What I was hearing seemed unbelievable. David actually considered me as a burden? I felt the weight of hopelessness slamming down on me as the walls closed in. I couldn't let them triumph. I had to shield my son. That evening, I plucked the bravery to face David. "We need to talk," I replied, my voice firm despite the tempest building inside me. Rising from the couch, he had surprise flickering in his eyes. "ABAUT what?" "About ourselves." "On Ethan?" My heart thumping in my chest, I answered, unable to keep acting as though everything is fine when it is not. David sighed and ran a hand over his hair. "Emily, I'm simply working through things." "Not expected this. Fatherhood, marriage, everything of it." "Neither," I snapped, frustration pouring over me. "But we are in this together. I need you right here for Ethan. For me. I cannot accomplish this by myself." He went quiet, and I could sense conflict in his eyes. His voice low, he murmured at last, "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." Tears lashing my eyes, I yelled, "I'm attempting to raise our boy under your mother's continual attacks. David, you have to pick me." He moved away, discounting me with a wave of his hand instead of the help I sorely needed. "Just give Grace some time. I'll straighten things out." He then withdrew to his regular place on the couch, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. Days passed and my emotional conditions started to sink. Surrounded by luxury, but without affection or support, I felt imprisoned in a golden cage. Our lifeline was Mark and Megan. They came often to my house and brought warmth and joy. As we sat in the living room one day, Mark sensed my discomfort. "Grace, lately you seem weird. Is everything under control?" Concern visible on his face, he asked. I sighed as the weight of the planet sank down on me. "Mark, I'm not sure. I seem to be losing David. He is never home, and when he is not really here." Megan stretched out to put a comforting touch on my shoulder. "You are doing a fantastic job with Ethan. Let no one tell you differently. You are stronger than you believe." Their generosity cheered me, but it was obvious the war was still raging. Caroline's influence was stifling. I could feel her grip around David tightening. I wanted a strategy to shield my son and me from the approaching storm. One evening following a particularly difficult day, I sat by myself in the nursery, holding Ethan in my arms. Though the silence engulfed us, I knew deep down I had to fight for our future. Mark and Megan at my side helped me to think about my future moves. Caroline's dictation of my life was unacceptable anymore. I had no idea darker days were to be ahead. Caroline's desperation would quickly inspire a plan to transform everything. The stakes were growing, and I had to get ready for the fight of my life. Breathing deeply, I held my kid closely, resolved to face whatever lay ahead. The Brooks Mansion's atmosphere grew progressively strained as the weeks went by. Caroline was hovering above us like a black cloud. Her contempt of me developed into something far more sinister. David stayed far off, preoccupied with his inner conflicts and mother's increasing sway. I felt as though I was caught in a dream and was frantically trying to get out while battling to keep my son safe. One evening, I heard heated voices coming from the living room as I was getting Ethan asleep. My curiosity won me, and I moved toward listening in stealth. David and Caroline were clearly debating. "You have to ground yourself, David," Caroline said, her voice cutting. "Grace causes distractions. She is not good for the family or you." "Mom, I'm not interested in hearing it." David pulled back. "She is my wife and the mother of my child. You have to come to terms with that." Though I knew better than to let it blind me, his words offered me a flutter of optimism. Caroline responded predictably. "You're messing around. She will take anything from you and is simply a gold digger. You must decide your family comes before hers." I got a cold running down my spine. The stakes were rising, and Caroline seemed to be plotting something evil. Whispering a vow to Ethan, I headed back to the nursery, clutching him securely. "I will defend you everywhere." Things started to go bad the next week. Desperate, Caroline developed a scheme that would upend the entire basis of our life. Mark called me one morning, his voice tinged with worry. "Grace, you must use caution. I lately learned about Caroline's strategy. She is seeking for a means of separating Ethan from you." I felt my heart drop. "What do you mean?" "Reports have claimed she has been consulting attorneys." Mark said, his voice sharp. "She wants to say David should have custody of Ethan, and you're unfit as a mother." "Unfit? I am doing all I can for him," I answered, panic starting in my chest. "I cannot let her whisk him away from here. My whole life is him." "I know, but we have to develop a strategy," Mark remarked, his voice grave. "You have to record everything, including your parenting and Megan and me's support. We will fight this via each other." I sat at the kitchen table that evening reviewing notes and documents. Though I had never felt so exposed in my life, I was driven to shield my boy. Every minute I spent getting ready served as a reminder of the love I harbored for Ethan and the extent I would go to protect him. Days were a haze of meetings with Mark and Megan gathering proof and support. Driven to guarantee that I had a fighting chance, I even contacted a family law attorney. But the conflict between David and Caroline intensified as I battled to guarantee my future. I overheard still another argument between them one afternoon. "You cannot let her control you like this, David," Caroline yelled. "You really have to consider your reputation." "Reputation? And with regard to my family?" David's voice quipped. "My family right now is Grace and Ethan. Can't you see that?" Once more I felt a flutter of hope, but it soon darkened when I watched Caroline storm out of the room, her face a mask of anger. She clearly was relentless in her attempt to distance us. One fatal night, I was sitting in the living room with Ethan asleep in my arms when the door knocked loudly, opening it to discover Caroline standing there, her face dark and scary. My heart surged. She said, her voice as icy, "We need to talk." "About what?" I answered, attempting to retain a calm voice. "Grace, I know what you are doing." Stepping inside without permission, she claimed, "You're trying to turn my son against me. You think you could just pull him from here." Ethan was closer, naturally shielded by me. "Ethan is my son. David is my hubby. I'm not trying to pull someone away from you." "Save your lies," Caroline said, snarled. "I will do whatever it means to keep my family together, even if it means getting rid of you." I stared at her, amazement and terror mixing in my chest. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," she said, a dark smile playing across her mouth. "Grace, this is not over." "Not exactly by chance." I started to get afraid as she went. The stakes were more than I had ever dreamed. I was in a war. As I considered how far Caroline may go to retain control over David and the family name, my heart hammered. Driven to keep strong for Ethan, I went to Mark and Megan for assistance. I understood I had to get ready for the battle of my life. I discovered a flutter of resiliency in the shadow of hopelessness, and I was ready to face whatever obstacles stood ahead. I had to be ready to negotiate the storm that was building. The days that followed Caroline's menacing visit seemed to be a ticking clock, every second reflecting my mounting concern for Ethan's future. I had to keep one step ahead since with conflict I knew she was getting closer to carrying out her plan. Inspired by Mark and Megan's unflinching support, I gave my heart and spirit what it needed to be ready for what lay ahead. I got a text from Mark one afternoon while I was going over notes from my attorney. "We need to meet. I have headlines." My heart skipped a beat. I hurriedly made plans to see him at our regular meeting point, a peaceful cafe free from distractions where we could have uninterrupted conversation. Mark's expression showed concern as he said, "Grace, I discovered Caroline has been lying about you. She is telling people you are unfit to look after Ethan and unstable." A rush of nausea swept over me. "She cannot do that. I have done everything to raise a decent daughter." Nick nodded. "No, but we have to record everything. Starting a thorough notebook of your everyday activities with Ethan can help you to show how much you value and adore him. Every minute element matters." Resolved once again, I started to log every moment I spent with Ethan. His first steps, his laughing when I peekaboo, and the quiet times when he fell asleep in my arms. Every entry became evidence of my love and dedication as a mother. Caroline's assaults get more forceful as I kept compiling proof. My lawyer called one afternoon to let me know Caroline had applied for temporary custody of Ethan, alleging I was unfit because of my inconsistent housing and lack of family support. I plummeted in heart. That was a clear falsehood, and I had to fight back. The day of the court hearing approached, and I felt clearly nervous. My hands shaking, I could sense the strain in the air as I walked into the courtroom. I inhaled deeply to calm myself. Mark and Megan sat in the rear providing quiet support. Sitting across from me, Caroline wore a smug smile. David was there as well, but he seemed conflicted, staring at my mother then at me. "Your Honor," Caroline began, her voice slanted with phony sorrow. "Grace is unfit to rear my grandchild. Her residence is unstable, and she does not really have any family support." Driven to protect myself, I got up. "Your Honor," said, "though my background is not rich, I am a committed mother. I have a great support network and work hard. Like family to me are Mark and Megan. I will go to great lengths to support Ethan." The judge listened carefully, and I had a flutter of optimism. I gestured toward Mark and Megan, then said, "I have documentation of my parenting and witnesses to attest to my character." Caroline laughed, but I persisted explaining my experience as a mother and the love I felt for Ethan. As I spoke, I could see the judge's demeanor change, and for the first time I thought I might have a shot. The judge declared his choice after what seemed like a lifetime. "I am giving Grace complete Ethan custody. She obviously has shown her commitment as a mother." Tears welling in my eyes, I experienced a flood of relief. I had performed it. Caroline was not fighting. I turned to see Mark and Megan shining with pride. She snarled as I passed Grace, "This isn't over." My voice calm, "Maybe not," I said, "but I will always fight for my son." My load dropped as I left the courtroom. Empowered, ready to start again with Ethan. Mark and Megan at my side assured me we could create a lovely family. Life started to move in different rhythm in the next months. The small things brought me delight. Ethan's laughing, his benchmarks, and the love growing among us. I was thriving, not just surviving now. Though Caroline and David will always be a part of my life, I had come to see the value of chosen family and the strength of will. My path had changed me, and at last I was ready to welcome the future with wide arms. We created a loving, laughing, and limitless possibilities household together. I understood as I held Ethan close that I was a warrior, prepared to meet whatever obstacles lied ahead, not only a survivor. And I felt very liberated, first in my life.